I love that process of inventing something and building something and then testing it and tweaking it, and then it really, I think this is going to be one of the projects that combines all of the stuff that I enjoy doing and I have some kind of aptitude for. There hasn't been very many jobs that I've done that really tapped into that. Linux, the entire Linux operating system is based on open source, essentially. So most of Linux is written by, people that enjoyed using it. It's a Unix type operating system. Unix was very expensive at the time, so this guy named Linus created Linux for everybody. Yeah, go figure. So it's the opposite of, Windows is kind of an open platform in that other people can write programs and use it on Windows. And then Mac, there is some people that develop for Mac, but a lot of things on Mac are made only to work on Mac and won't work on something else. I mean, I guess there is still Microsoft Office for Mac, but you can't just buy one and get it to work on everything, kind of thing. Anyway, so the idea of Linux, which the Raspberry Pi runs on Linux. It's an open source, community-based, freely available operating system. So, I'll be creating the parts in FreeCAD, which is a free open source program. The 3D printers a lot of them are based on open source designs. You can go buy all of the individual parts, make your own 3D printer, and download free software to make the thing work. Okay, so that's community-based open source solutions. I would love the robot to stay in that realm so that it would be freely available, so anybody with a 3D printer could make the parts that I'm making, bolt them together, and then they could load the same software that I'm using, and then they could have a robot. Okay. Some of this is just complete pipe dreams. Okay, we'll just acknowledge that. The Mars helicopter, Ingenuity, they used parts from, not all of it, but there's some parts on Ingenuity that are off-the-shelf, freely available. Not, you had to buy them, but they just bought off-the-shelf parts. Okay. I think it was the altimeter. So they have basically a laser beam that shoots out of the bottom of the helicopter, bounces off the ground, comes up, and then the little thing can time how fast it went. It's the speed of light, but they could still measure the time between when they sent it and it received, and then they cut that in half, and then that's how high they are. Okay. They aren't going very high, but maybe 10 meters, 30, 40 feet, something like that. I haven't seen the last one, but they're apparently still flying it, which is amazing. They didn't think they'd, like you start off, is it going to work at all? And then it did, and then they're like, well, we're going to do 5 or 10 test flights, and every one they did something a little bit more difficult, and it still works. So they're like, okay, now what do you do? Anyway, so I talked about the Mars analog on one of the other videos. So the engineers and some of the astronauts are going out in the desert, on Earth, and they put on a spacesuit simulator. So it's maybe parts of a spacesuit, but it's not pressurized usually. And it's got the backpack, and then they wear the gloves, and then they walk around, and they practice doing astronaut stuff in the desert. Okay. And sometimes you'll see them pulling a little cart behind them with some of their tools, or they might have a replica of a rover with them. And I just thought, this would be the coolest thing ever. And this is like far beyond reality at this point. But wouldn't it be cool if we could say, we have our rover and we get it all working, and somehow they find out that we got one. It's like, instead of them going out and buying $100,000 thing, or, they would go to, well, they've got their own JPL guys, but they're building their own rovers for Mars, right? You're not going to take a real Mars rover out in the desert and trash it. These things are, super expensive, right? But what you could do, if you loaded their software on a cheaper robot, it could do the same kinds of things, right? I just, that would be the ultimate, you know. But if we can have like an open source robot that somebody like, NASA or a college or a school could get. So let's say there's a robot club at the local high school. Okay. In a year, it's hard to have enough time to build the robot and program it and do any useful testing with it before the kid graduates. Okay. But what if in the beginning of the year they already had the physical robot sitting there? Then they could learn the software side of it and spend more time developing the software because the robot itself already worked. Or what about if we had the robot platform working and then they could come along and they could put all of their experiments and cameras and all the other stuff on top of it? The iRobot, Roomba, the little robot, looks like a little disc that goes around and vacuums your house. Okay. The company figured out that people were buying broken ones and using them to make their robots out of. And so they took advantage of that, and you can now go to iRobot.com, I think, and they'll sell you the kit. It doesn't have the vacuum anymore, but it's got the motors, the encoders, the charging system. It's got the little dock that it can drive itself over and plug in and charge. And it's got the app, and so you can sit there with your phone and you can tell the robot where to go. And I've seen videos about this where you're sitting there and you realize that there's a spill. You just call up the robot and say, go clean up the spill, and it'll know exactly where to go. Okay. So there's a huge advantage to having a platform that's already built that, because, there's people I've seen videos of that are really, really gifted, but they aren't very good with making mechanical things. Okay. So if you had somebody that was really good at programming, they would buy the robot kit, do their programming on it, and they would not have to waste a year learning how to build the hardware side of it. That's kind of what I'm looking at is, could I get it to the point that this was good enough that somebody else would be like, okay, instead of me spending a year learning how to make this thing, I'll just go buy it, and it's better than the $20 one you can buy on eBay. That's kind of what I'm thinking is, there is $15 and $20 and $30 kits on eBay that are made out of plastic and they have little tiny motors, and they can drive around your kitchen floor. They probably would not be able to drive over carpet, that kind of thing. They're just right on the edge of not quite working, but they do kind of work. So you can program them and you can do a lot with them, but they really aren't big enough to take outside. Okay, so that's kind of what I'm looking at is, could I make that kit that was, like the prototype that I showed on the first video, the size of a beer cooler, right? And if I kind of copied the ideas of how the Mars rover worked as far as the bogie suspension and how the wheels are set up, and then we just put the box on top of it. It could be a cooler, it could be like a storage tote. You could put stuff on it to carry it, whatever, right? There's also companies that are making these robots now that can basically, it's like you can order food from a restaurant that doesn't normally deliver, and then like iDash, I think. So some of these companies are coming along, like Uber was doing it, I think. I don't know if they're still doing it. But the idea is you take a delivery company and they can go pick up your order at the restaurant and bring it to your house so you don't have to go get it. Okay. Well, some of these guys are experimenting with robots now. So you get this robot that's about the size of what we're looking at, roughly the size of an electric wheelchair. And it's got a box on it. And the robot knows how to drive down the sidewalk. It's got GPS, and it knows where it is and where you are. And so it just says, okay, I'll just go, drive it along. And it'll get to your front door, and then it'll call you, and you come out. It could call your phone, or your app would beep, and you're like, oh, my robot is at the front door, so you go out and you get it. All right. So there's people doing this. Okay. So if you could have the hardware side of it built, and it was good enough for them to use for testing, at least. That's kind of one of the possible goals, is we would just have this thing. It's like, okay, here, it works. You can take your phone, like for instance, the MIT Inventor app from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I always just think MIT. Anyway, they have free software you can use with your phone to create your own little app. Okay, and I've seen people do that, where you take, like How To Mechatronics is a guy that I learned this from. Just go get the free app. You can do simple programming, and then if your robot has Bluetooth on it, the phone can control the robot through Bluetooth, and that would work up to 30 feet. And you've already got your phone, so you don't have to go buy anything for it. And you would have literally like a $5 part on the robot that could receive the Bluetooth commands, and then the rest of it, is whatever. So you could have that, and it would just work. So you could be walking along, and you could be driving your robot from your phone up to 30 feet away. Okay. So I guess, to me, there's a lot of people doing this stuff. So, on the one hand, you're like, oh, everybody's already done it all. Yeah, but not really. Just because somebody else had a good idea doesn't mean you can't kind of have the same idea. In fact, all you got to do is, like, reference them. And it's like, hey, this, I see a lot of these guys do it. They're like, well, I saw this guy over here do this, and I'm going to put my own spin on it. And, go watch his video, because he had a lot of good stuff on it. We all kind of build off of each other. You're not going to build it all in a vacuum. That's what keeps me up at night, I guess, or gets me out of bed in the morning. On the Turtle project, I was really not thinking about using it for anybody besides me, so I took some shortcuts, and I thought, okay, my goal for Turtle was to get from here to the post office and back, 25 miles. So I had some specific goals for that. But I never really thought of it as something that was going to be, so good that, everybody would want one. And I don't think anybody, not very many people could have used what I was trying to do anyway. It's not going to be like, the next big thing. There is a lot of companies trying to make these little home automation robots that can drive around. So when you're at work, you can check on the dog or something like that. It seems like there's a lot of neat programs and neat things out there, and they aren't really working very good. And I think what happens, I've heard people talk about this, the original guy had this really good idea, and then they get investors involved, and somebody flips the switch from being really, really good to being something they can sell 1,000 of or 100,000 of. And in the process of going from the really good one to the one that they take to market, everything gets watered down and it doesn't work as good. So on this end of it, if I build this to work out here, and then even if I make a smaller one, if we build it with that kind of mentality, it's going to be really strong. It's going to be something that you can fix. If it has any plastic body panels, they're going to have screws so you can take them off. It's not going to be snapped together. Well, it's like, okay, the right to repair, right? You buy something, and the company that sold it to you almost doesn't want you to have it, is the way it feels like. You're like, oh, here's this thing, but, don't take it apart. That'll avoid the warranty. I want this to be more like the old PCs, when a little shop could build a computer, and then you could take it home and you could take it apart and put your own parts in it if you wanted to. That's what I want. I want this to be like open source and open architecture, where if you decide, hey, I really like this, but I want to do something different with it, great, it's yours. If the part that I made broke, I'll work with you. If you put something else on, I might still be able to help you, but, I want this to be a stepping stone, not the end result. I think that would be the way to look at it. Well, how big do you want it to be? I think the beer cooler is a neat prop. That's about the size I would build for out here for what I want to do. That's almost too big, but it would still go through your doorway. One of the things I kind of loosely kind of grabbed onto is, as long as it's as big as not any bigger than a wheelchair, right? Because most places, I don't know that this would ever, This one will probably never leave the ranch. Although, what if we get it working, everything's cool, I start reaching out, maybe take it to a local school, so we drive it into the classroom and explain it to people, right? So if it could fit through the doorway, and it would have to be human safe, which would be something to think about. Like, for instance, if it sensed that it was running into somebody, it would stop. That would be good. Most robots you have to tell them not to run over people. So we'd have to think about that, because all the little kids would freak out and come running up to it, right? And pretty soon all the things would get broken off. Okay, so we'll think about that. But that would be a reason to keep it not too big. That one, kids would love it. Two, we could take it to a school. And we could show it to them, and then we could take it outside and we could show them how it works. I mean, there are school STEM programs, STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, I guess. Anyway, something like that. So one of the things that we're learning is we got to get kids excited about this kind of stuff, or else they're going to sit there on their phone all day, right? So guys like Flight Test, they created their airplanes out of paper foam board, and they created this, million subscriber channel based on that idea. Huge community around it. Well, they started opening it up and made a specific program for kids in schools, such that they could show the teacher how it worked. The teacher could show the kids how to build their own little airplane, and pretty soon they're out in the playground flying RC airplanes instead of playing on their phone all day. Wow, right? So if we could kind of look at it like that point of view, I would think maybe we could do 3 levels. It doesn't make any sense for me to try to make a $100 robot. There's no way I can compete with anybody else at that price range. I can't buy enough volume, so my parts would cost too much, So, I can't sell it for $100 is the idea. One thought, if I got to first we got to get the first one to work. Then we develop it a little bit, and then we see if anybody else wants it. If I could sell one a month at $1,000, I'd be set. My expenses are so low out here, right? So that's something I'm kind of considering. If I got it to the point, maybe I can sell one a week, right? The software would be all the same, so once I had the software working, I wouldn't have to reprogram everyone. I would just drop the operating system on it, and okay, here's your flash drive, go crazy, right? If I got it to the point I figure out, okay, here's a really good motor I like, here's a gear, like I might do planetary gears to drive the wheels, okay. Either I could make my own planetary gears. Honestly, 3D printed gears, I've seen tests with them, they can be really, really good. So that's not necessarily off the table. It might work with 3D printed gears, but if nothing else, I can prototype with 3D printed gears. Maybe I'll find a source for a really nice little gearbox that I can just get, or you buy a gear motor. A lot of guys are using those, so you buy the motor that already has the gearbox right on it. You just attach the wheel to that, and you're done. Then you go on to the next step. Motor speed controllers are pretty easy to find. That's not I wouldn't reinvent anything like that. I would just go buy one and put it in. Right. I would think the base model, just say it includes a radio controller. There you go. So it's a $50 radio controller. It's good for a quarter of a mile, maybe. That's plenty. How many places would the average person be able to go? Like a really, really big park. You're not supposed to fly a drone out of line of sight. I wonder if there's any rules about a driving drone. Because they're like, oh, it's going to run into somebody, right? But for now, it's like, I'm not worried about that because there shouldn't be anybody else on my property. The way I'm looking at this, I make some money from just the videos that people watch. Okay. You watch the video, there's some ads on the video, I get a small percentage of that. Okay. Second income source would be from Patreon and YouTube members. maybe you see a video and you learn something from it, or you just, people pay for entertainment, right? I mean, if you've got a Netflix account or whatever, you're paying a little bit, or your cable TV, right? So what I used to do when I lived in Austin, instead of paying for cable TV, I used things like Patreon, and I helped support people that were creating content that I enjoyed, right? That was way before I started using it for myself. So I'd be like, okay, here's this video. I always enjoyed watching it, and I'd throw them a couple dollars. Great, no big deal, right? So some of my income, all of my income basically is coming from my YouTube videos in one way or another, from the ads or from direct contributions from PayPal and YouTube members, or super thanks. You hit the little heart button, throw me $1. It adds up, right? So if I made the robot, like, okay, Turtle Project, how many videos did it take me to decide that the bicycle I was building really wasn't working? But I had a lot of people watching the videos, right? Or even the bike trailers. One of my top 5 videos ever is about one of the bike trailers I made. It wasn't even the good one, but sometimes you make a video and people start watching it, right? All of a sudden you get this video that's got 100,000 views. Cool, right? So even if I never sold a robot, my video about how to make the robot could be something that people would watch. And there's this thing like infotainment is a word. You are entertained by something that you're watching, but you're also kind of learning from it. Okay, people will sit there and watch a video over and over again and never actually do it, but they'll watch it. Okay, great. So, yeah. I was going to sell the ranch. I mean, if somebody showed up with a pile of money, I might still do it. But when I got back from the bike trip, I was pretty sure I was going to sell the ranch. And what made me kind of stop, I mean, obviously I put the video up that said I was selling the ranch. If somebody buys it, great. But all of a sudden I realized that I had spent, I mean, it wasn't like I had forgot, but I had spent thousands of dollars when I lived in Austin buying little trinkets and stuff like that. I mean, it was like there's no $1,000 part. I just bought a bunch of little stuff, but they are all stuff that I could use on the robot, right? And so I got this, half of my storage room is full of totes that have some of these parts in them. So what really made me want to stay here, at least for a little bit longer, was like, this would be the perfect place to test the robot. One, I could do the welding and grinding outside and make a noise and build the thing. But when I got it working, this was exactly the place that I wanted to test it. And if I ever, if I sold this place and ended up living in a van, one, I wouldn't have room for all that stuff. It would cost me storage money to keep it after I had already spent money buying it. I'm like, well, this is no good. I'm running the 3D printer on solar. I couldn't have enough solar power on a van to run the 3D printer. That would just not work. All right. So I started like, oh, well, if nothing else, let me build the robot while I'm here. And then if I end up staying, great. And I talked about the pipe dream, if NASA bought one. Okay, that's probably not going to happen. But, but wouldn't it be cool if the little robot is what let me stay here, because I could make enough money from the videos and maybe selling parts or something like that, that I could stay here. That'd be kind of cool. And I guess, the last thing is, like, I'm in my 50s now. I got, a few years before I can pull Social Security. I've already got the ranch. It's paid for. I got the house. It's paid for. I got the bus. It's full of parts. I got, all this other stuff. I've done the work. I might as well stay here if I can afford to. And really all I need, a few more parts and food. So, good work. I've gone further with less of a plan. And for me, I got to have something I'm looking forward to. And I think this is it. You know, it's like, I had so much fun when I was building Turtle. I mean, I just get out there with a grinder and a pile of old bikes and start cutting parts apart and welding and grinding, and I was having a blast. It was kind of sad when it didn't work, you know. But I love that process of inventing something and building something, and then testing it and tweaking it, and then it really, I think this is going to be one of the projects that combines all of the stuff that I enjoy doing and I have some kind of aptitude for. There hasn't been very many jobs that I've done that really tapped into that. When I worked as a mechanic, that was actually a pretty good job because I got to learn, you know, one specific specific skills of, okay, replace the motor, replace the transmission, you know, that kind of stuff. Okay. Plus, I got to learn the troubleshooting, plus I did a little bit of fabrication. By the time I left, I was at a point where I got permission to just kind of stop working on the trucks for about a month, and I did some fabrication. We had a specific problem on the mail trucks that kept breaking. I looked at it, I'm like, hey, I got an idea we could fix that. You know, so we did a couple, and it actually worked, and they were like, well, okay. I forget what we looked at my daily wage, and we looked at what that part would cost to buy. And I could fix that part in less than a day, rebuild it, and it was better than original. And it would have cost us $800 to buy it, and I don't think they paid me $200 a day. So they're like, oh, knock yourself out. How many of these do you want to do? You know, so I just sat there and cranked out doors for a while. It was the door, the sliding door, it always broke. So I figured out the weak point on it, and I added a little bit to it and made it better, and you know, and then I left, so I have no idea if it actually helped, and if anybody, you know, picked up on the idea after I left or not, you know. But it was kind of fun that, you know, I could look at it and be like, hey, I think I know how to fix this, you know. Yeah. So this is the thing I want to do. There's been a lot of things that it's hard for me to find a job that does anything for me aside from, you know, food. I guess that's worth something, but end of the day, if you're having a rough day, this is no good. You got to find something you enjoy doing. So I don't have the discipline to do something I hate, I guess. Not likely I'll change that anymore. Anyway, that's me. That's what I'm doing. So if you're interested, thanks for watching. Go ahead and subscribe, and this will end up on the Mars Clipper channel. You probably figured that out if you're seeing it. But if you wanted to support on Patreon, that's an option. I don't have YouTube members on this channel yet, but we'll try to get that soon. It's just you need 1,000 subscribers, so definitely subscribe. And stay tuned. We got more coming. That's it for now. Bye.